Okay, so today what I want to go through is a type of problem that is going to come up probably on the AP exam. And so I want to go through what exactly they look like and how you would go about solving them. So banks, institution, no. Let me get a better pen. So banks and institutions have something called an assets and liabilities table. All right, assets and liabilities table. And what this table does essentially counts for all the stuff that banks have in their possession, some things you could say they own, and things that they owe to others, right? So you're going to see an assets and liabilities table called also a balance sheet. Right? And a balance sheet, it's in the word, has to balance. So whatever number you get down here has to equal the number that comes down here. Now, things that a bank owns, or their assets, would be their total reserves. All right? And so remember, your total reserves are going to equal your required reserves and your excess reserves. So you'll have total reserves, required reserves, excess reserves. Now the proportion of that money that is in required versus excess is going to differ based upon what the reserve requirement for the bank is, right? Under that, they're also going to have probably loans, right? That's an asset that's going to come due in 10, 15, 20 years, right? And then they may also have securities. So that's treasuries, that's bonds, stocks, things like that, right? And so whatever you have on this side, add that up, it's going to be the numerical amount of assets they have. Now the other side, right, where does the required reserve and the excess reserve money come from? Well, that comes from the demand deposits. Now demand deposits are your money that you put into the bank, right? So you might also see it called checkable deposits. Right? And so that's money that is owed to you. When you deposit money in the bank technically owes you $100. Right? But they don't keep it there, they put it into the loaning system, right? Now, you're going to see also something called owner's equity sometimes on some of these questions. And what owner's equity is the share of value that the owner of the bank or the starting institution of the bank has put into the bank, and that is owed to them if the owner wants to take out. Now, for this, you will never do anything with owner's equity, right? So if you ignore that, don't have to worry about it. Now, why does this matter? Well, because you're going to see questions that look like this, right? And so questions that look like this, you're going to ask yourself, okay, what's going on here? So you can get a lot of information from this balance sheet. So let's take a look, and first let's highlight a couple things. First, we can see that we have a balance here, right? We have $200 in reserves and $1,800 in loans, and we have $2,000 in demand deposits. 2,000, 2,000. So we have the balance that I was talking about, right? But we can glean a lot of information out of this. So let's take a look at this first question here. So the first question is, what is the dollar amount of new loans that the bank can make, right? So now the question then becomes, well, how do we figure that out? Well, because we know we have $200 in reserve. So the first thing we need to figure out is what part of this 200 is required and which part is excess, because then we can answer the question. Well, if we have 10% reserve requirement and 10% of 2,000 is 200, then we know that this in your reserves, you have 200 in required, and that leaves you nothing in excess. So the answer to this first question is 0, because all money is required. None is in the excess. So now, if Mr. Smith deposits $100 of cash in a demand deposit account, calculate the maximum amount of new loans that the first superior bank can make. So, that the first superior bank can make, right? So if we have $100 in deposits, we have a 10% reserve requirement, that means, let me get rid of some of this here, zoom in a little bit. So we get add 100 here. Now we need to put it somewhere over here. So we know we have 200 in required, and as of right now we have 0 in excess. Well, 10% of 100 is 10. So 10 is going to go here. The other 90 needs to find a home on the left somewhere. So we're going to put that here. So that means the answer to B is the bank initially can lend out an additional $90. All right? New loans that this bank can make. Now let's take a look at C. So C, as a result of Mr. Smith's 100 deposit, calculate the maximum amount, maximum change over time in each of the following in the banking system. So this is the banking system. So what that is essentially asking you to think about is the multiplied impact. Right? So when this 90 goes out, it may not go back into first superior. It might go into PNC. Right? And so PNC receives 90, keeps 10% of it, loans out the other 90% of it, right? And then that 90% gets deposited into TD Bank, bingo bango, and then it gets deposited into Wells Fargo, and portion is saved and portion is spent, right? So it's that multiplied impact. So when we're talking about multiplied impact, we need to use our friend, the reserve requirement multiplier. So we're going to find 1 over 0.1, and we know that the multiplied impact of all loans made is going to be 10. So, if that's the case, and we know that that initial loanable money is 90, that 90 goes out, is multiplied through the economy 10 times to create a total change in the banking system of $900. Now, what happens to demand deposits? Well, for every dollar that gets lent out, it's a loan over here, but it becomes a demand deposit over here, right? If you get a loan for $5,000, what do you do with it? You put it into the bank. Boop, it goes over here. So we have that 900 plus Mr. Smith's original $100 deposit gives us $1,000. All right? So that's a change in the banking system plus, or excuse me, that's now this $100 isn't new money. That's old money that's already existed, but it creates 900. Now D is where it gets a little different. As a result of Mr. Smith's $100 cash deposit, the maximum change in the money supply. Well, the money supply has only changed by 900, right? Because this $100 already existed in the money supply because it was cash, right? And so then the last question here is provide one reason why the actual change in money supply can be smaller than the maximum change identified, right? So one reason would be banks don't have to loan it all out, hold their excess reserves, right? So in this example, the bank has $90 in excess reserves, but if they don't have to loan it all out. They have an incentive to, but they don't have to, right? So they may only loan 70 of it out. Well, 70 times 10 is only going to create 700, so that's going to be a smaller change in the money supply, right? So that's one case. Two, in order for the other banks to get the money, the consumers need to deposit it. So if consumers hold the cash and don't put it back into the system, that's going to weaken it, right? So if we loan out $90 to McKenna, and she, instead of putting it in the bank, puts it under her mattress, well, now the multiplied impact of that $90 loan is going to stop right at McKenna because no other bank gets that $90 to loan it out to somebody else, right? And so the kind of process stops before it can multiply through, right? So if the banks don't loan it all out, or if consumers hold on to the money, the multiplied impact is weakened. Okay. So I want you to take a look at the two activities I have for you to do today. It's essentially just getting you to better understand how to interpret and read these assets and liabilities tables. Okay, thank you guys.